pay more attention to calorie count, right? I need to lose some of those too. Fats, sodium, and so on. That's important information. Next, nutritional composition. Currently in the US, if there's any change to the food that affects the vitamins, minerals, nutrients, that has to be labeled. So, some people say, well, we need to have labels on GMOs because, I'm allergic to things and I need to know if there's a GMO in there that might have an allergen. Well, allergens are already labeled under our current labeling policy in this country. So those people can rest assured the food will be labeled. And it will be labeled according to the allergen, not simply that it was a GMO. Right? Because a GMO need not have anything to do with the actual allergen. It doesn't tell you anything about the source. It just tells you the process that was used in the breeding of that material. Safety information is on the label already. New toxins, new allergens, any anti-nutritional substances, they have to be there. So it comes down to, yeah, but I have a right to know. I have a right to know. Let's go through this fairly quickly and finish up. If we do have a right to know, it's always about GMOs, but genetic engineering. What about the other things that people may be curious about? Pesticides. The surveys show that consumers are far more interested in pesticides than they are with GMOs. But the labeling campaigns are exclusively limited to GMOs, or genetically engineered ingredients. If people have a right to know what's in their food, why do they have a right to know about GMOs but not about pesticides? Or about other things that consumers may have some interest in? Why is it limited? And then it's only some genetically engineered products at that. There's a lot of exceptions. Even in places where they have the labeling laws like Europe, the activists still aren't satisfied because there are so many exceptions. The foods that they want to have labeled aren't labeled. Like the hard cheese made with chymosin, it's not labeled. Meat from animals that are fed on genetically modified soy, that's not labeled. Restaurant food, it's not labeled. Wine made from genetically modified yeast, it's not labeled. And activists, so even when we try to appease them, they're not satisfied. Activists are never satisfied. That's a lesson for us. Other breeding methods, ionizing radiation, right? We use ionizing radiation to scramble the DNA to make mutants to give us things like ruby red grapefruit, the Calrose rice, various durum wheats. Lots of things are out there being grown, and people aren't aware and aren't being told that ionizing radiation was used in the breeding process of that material. If people only knew this, I think they'd want to have that labeled far ahead of any GMO. And why are organic foods exempt from listing their pesticides used? Organic, sometimes the people will say, but organic is labeled, why can't GMOs be labeled? Organic is a voluntary label, and it only tells you that they followed the organic procedure. So, the same that kosher or halal foods, that's a voluntary label. And so far, so is GMOs. If we want to make organic a mandatory label, they don't like that idea. Next, please. So finally, become informed. There's a lot of good information out there, but it's swamped by the bad information that you'll find on the internet. Seek information and advice from actual experts. Again, ask about credibility, ask about credentials and authority. Beware of the emotion-charged tactics, people using their kids to hold placards. Logical fallacies, the causation and correlation issue. For example, hear both sides, right? This is the thing that's great about our judicial system. We don't hang people after the prosecution issues their arguments. We listen to the defense, right? Maybe we'll end up deciding for the prosecution, maybe we'll believe the defense, but we listen to both sides. Why can't we do that in this debate? So many people make up their minds after listening to one side, but not the other. And it's not always the activist side. Not always the activist side. I make a point of listening to their arguments because maybe they have something to listen to. Maybe they don't. I won't know that until I actually listen. And apply critical thinking. This is most important. You don't have to be a scientist. You just have to think. And think about what makes sense. Because most of this is just common sense that for some reason has become an oxymoron. It's not common anymore. Let's bring that back. And with that, I think I'll quit there and turn it back to you. Mahalo.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, doctor. Okay, I know you probably have a lot of questions in your mind. So if you're shy about coming up and using the microphone, Dawn is here and she has some paper that you can write your questions on, and would be happy to take those questions to Dr. Allen here. But to get us warmed up, maybe we want to find out share with us your personal journey. How did you get started with studying this issue?
It wasn't intentional. When I started, I was a science student. I was always interested in science. I wanted to understand how the world worked. So I started out in biology, and I was very interested in genetics. So I focused on genetics, and in those days, DNA, the study of DNA, I don't want to date myself, but it was in its infancy, and we were just figuring out the genetic code and recognizing that all living things use the same language in its DNA. And this is what makes genetic engineering possible. I mean, if the genetic code were different between a bacteria and a corn plant, we would simply never be able to do genetic engineering, because the corn plant wouldn't be able to read the DNA from the bacteria. But the DNA is universal, so the corn plant is able to read the bacterial DNA and make the same protein from that. And then as I was in graduate school and postdocing, I recognized that biotechnology could be a very important tool to help overcome some of the world problems. We still have 1 billion people that are hungry and malnourished in this world, and that's tragic. It's unnecessary. So is there some way that I as an individual could use my newfound skills to help overcome and help feed more of these people? And so I decided to go into applying my skills in molecular genetics and biotechnology to agriculture. Most of my colleagues went into the medical field, right? They have the same genetic background, but they went into medicine because they wanted to make a lot of money. And they did, and they help people. They're developing medicines and treatments using genetics, the same tools that I use, but I'm more interested in helping feed people. So that's really how I got involved in it. I appreciated being able to work at major universities and learn from masters, and dedicated my own profession to the general public. So that's what led me to where I am now.
Great. Thank you, Doctor.
Sure.
Okay, we have a question back here.
Well, actually, I thought that was a really good presentation, but my question would be, like Adolf said earlier, political-wise, they got something coming on petition through county council. Why hasn't, and not just directed at you, but at the corn companies, why hasn't a CD been made in this forum to educate people? Because as you can see, not many of the businesses are here, but a CD be made in a more shorter content to educate people that could watch it in the privacy of their homes, to educate themselves, and then also get the other side of the so-called story. And why hasn't the corn companies or people trying to promote GMO petitioned in support to take that to ballot to county council?
Well, great question. Obviously, that's more for the local community to address, but I can say on a more global aspect, there are some very good videos on the science of GMOs, on what the potential hazards are that we need to watch out for and manage properly. They're all available on YouTube or even on these CDs that they give out. GMO Answers on the internet, gmoanswers.org, is it, or gmoanswers.com. They are overwhelmed by the opposite information. If you go on YouTube for short videos on GMOs or GMO safety and search for those things, 95% of them will be from activist organizations that will try to convince you that GMOs are hazardous. And the quality is very poor. Intellectually, very poor. The information is very poor. But the production values are very high. Right? They put a lot of money into these things, so they're very slick presentations, and they're memorable. You look at them and you remember. And there's any number of books from charlatans who have no scientific credentials. Jeffrey Smith, for example, is sometimes cited as the expert on GMO hazards. The man has no scientific credentials. His last known job was as a ballroom dance instructor, but he doesn't like GMOs. He's written books. He's sold lots of these books to gullible people who are willing to pay money and get bad information from it. So there is good information out there, but you have to apply your critical thinking when you see it to determine whether it's actually valid. You have to ask those questions that I mentioned earlier. You know, what are the credentials of the people who put this together? And go from there. So, you know, many of these short videos have been produced. Some of them are good quality, others not so good quality. And it's an unregulated market at the moment. You know, the internet is a wonderful place. I love the internet. I think it's great because anybody can say anything. But that's also its greatest weakness. Anybody can say anything. So you really have to know your critical thinking skills. Here more locally, you know, it's up to your community to get together and talk about these things as you're doing now. Bring up these points and see what you can do more locally to get information across.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but you know, to send somebody to the internet, like an older person, I mean, why not a mass mail out of something like this, your take as a specialist, as a neutral body, bullet pointed, boom, 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 boom. You know, versus telling somebody to go to the internet. I mean, I think what we're faced with is educating the community.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's educating, yeah. Make something really simple, not, I mean, when
Yeah, not too
20,
big.
yeah, it's just too blown out of, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people here on Molokai, or say for the County of Maui, because the problem right now we're facing is County of Maui, a resolution is being proposed to come to ballot. You got, what, 7 more months before this thing hits. Then the moratorium comes in. Something as simple as what you just said today, bullet pointing pros and cons, would in my opinion, you know, fit well to meet the needs versus, hey, go to YouTube and you know, we just leave with something simple. Just justify what the take is on genetic and genetic modification. And you had a great presentation.
Thank you.
I agree with the points of genetically modified corn and so forth, and realize what we eat and what we use on a daily basis, and totally support the idea. But it's to convince those that are sitting on the fence and those that are in opposition.
Right.
Is what I think we need to help with.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
I do agree. I'm an educator, and that, you know, part of the reason I came here today was to help educate and get people to think about these issues more critically and assure them that there are people who are working in the public interest. We're not trying to sell a product. That there's a lot more to this story than you've been told by the other side. But really, it is, in essence, this is a local issue. You know, your ballot initiatives and the council and so on. You know, I hesitate to come in here from the mainland and try to tell you how you should run the show. That's up to the local community. But there are people who are willing to help. You know, I'm one of them, but there are many others as well. And with some coordination, you know, from Dawn and from others, David Gilliland is, was he here? He's here now. You know, from Dow. You know, there are people who have the connections. The information is available. You just have to be careful about the information. There's a huge amount of information. So one big job is to say, well, out of this mountain of information, you know, what can we extract and provide to, for example, the older people that you mentioned that may not be comfortable with going to the internet? That's a big job in itself. You know, just what do you provide? But that's, you know, kind of up to the local people because they know what the local sensitivities are. You know, I can get a sense of them, but, you know, very, very minor. You know, you're the experts on the local community, not me.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. So One last question, because I want to be mindful of the time. We did promise people that they're
that's
going to
right.
be out of here by 7:30. So this is not a GMO question, but still very interesting. How can you tell an organic fruit or vegetable? How does it differ from regularly cultivated vegetable?
I'm not sure of any scientific test of a purportedly organic tomato or carrot that you could take into the laboratory and test it and say, oh, this is definitely organic. Because we know in the United States, organic is a process, it's not a product. Farmers follow organic procedures. They don't end up with a particular product that has certain features. We know the nutrient content is about the same, whether it's grown organically or conventionally. The nutrient composition is a function of the plant variety, of the soil condition it was grown in, and the environmental conditions, whether it was a wet year or a dry year. Those are the factors that influence the nutrient composition. So there's no indication that an organic food is superior in nutrition or in safety or even in taste. Taste is a function, again, of the variety and of the freshness. So if you have the same variety grown on neighboring farms by a conventional farmer and an organic farmer, and they're harvested at the same time, and you taste them 3 or 4 days later, taste tests have shown that consumers can't tell the difference. So there's no difference in taste. The only way, or let me put it this way, the most reliable way of telling whether a tomato is organically grown, it'll have a higher price tag.
Well said. Okay, well, you have 1 minute to wrap up and some parting words.
Thank you all for coming out. I know this is a very contentious issue. It shouldn't be. This is food. We have a job to do. We have coming up to 9 billion people on this planet. Every one of them deserves to eat. We have to produce food. It's largely our job because we have the leadership in this. And I will support any farmer and any company and any technology that can provide more quality food, safe food, produced sustainably and economically so poor people can buy it as well as the 1%. I will support them. And it doesn't matter whether it's GMO or organic or conventional. But to think that in the last hour that I've been speaking, 1,000 people on this planet died from malnutrition. That's tragic. That's just in the last hour, right? 24,000 people every single day, day in and day out, die. We could save at least, maybe not all of them, but we can save more than that, right? We can save at least some of them. And some people are interfering with that noble goal. So thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
I
One more
welcome you
time,
joining
ladies
me.
and gentlemen. Let's give it up for Dr. Alan McHughen. We want to thank Monsanto and Don for putting all this together. Adolf, thank you very much. And David, mahalo to everyone for coming. Facts, science, evidence. That was my takeaway tonight. I hope that was your takeaway too. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good evening and mahalo.